The sun was a merciless coin of fire hanging in the middle of an empty sky, and the desert stretched to the edges of the world. The woman staggered through the burning dunes, her face pale beneath a veil of dust. Her lips were cracked, and her hands trembled as she clutched the small bundle wrapped in torn linen against her chest. Inside the bundle, two newborns cried weakly, their tiny voices swallowed by the wind. Each sound was a fragile protest against the silence of death that surrounded them. Her name was Layla. She had once lived in a village that lay at the border of the sands, a cluster of stone huts around a dried-up well. The people there were poor, suspicious, bound by old customs that weighed heavier than the sun itself. When her labor began, she had cried out for help, but only the wind had answered. The man she had called husband, the same man who had promised to love her, had turned his face away when the midwife whispered that twins were a curse. In their tribe's lore, twins were a sign of betrayal, a punishment from the gods. The father of twins was said to be one man, the mother another. So they had driven her out. In the last hour of her agony, as one child came and then the other, they loaded her on a cart and cast her into the desert. The midwife had begged them to show mercy, but the men only spat on the ground. Layla's husband had not met her eyes. He had simply said, "Let the sand take what it wants." Now, 3 days later, the sand had taken almost everything. Her strength was gone. Her tongue felt like leather. She could feel the fever creeping into her bones. But she kept walking, step after step, her shadow shrinking behind her as the day burned on. When the sun began to fall, she stumbled on a stone and dropped to her knees. The bundles rolled beside her, and one of the babies gave a faint cry. She turned, panic flooding her, and pressed them close again. "Hush," she whispered, though her voice was nothing more than a rasp. "Hush, my stars. Mama's here." Night came quickly in the desert. The heat fled, leaving a chill that cut through her thin clothes. She lay beside her children and tried to keep them warm, her body shaking as she held them under her shawl. She looked up at the stars, millions of them, cold and bright, and wondered if they were the souls of mothers who had lost their children too. She prayed for rain, for death, for anything that would stop the crying in her arms. Far away, a horse's hooves broke the silence. The man who rode it was named Samir. He was a wanderer, a trader of small things, water, dates, trinkets from one village to another. He had lived more years in the desert than he could count. That night he was following a faint trail of smoke he'd seen at sunset, hoping it meant people, or at least shelter. But when he reached the dunes where the smoke had been, he found only a collapsed fire and the figure of a woman lying half buried in sand. He dismounted and ran to her side. Her face was ghostly under the moonlight, her eyes half open but unfocused. Beside her lay two small shapes wrapped in cloth. He thought they were stones at first, until one of them moved. Samir cursed softly under his breath and knelt. "Hey," he whispered, touching her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Layla's eyelids fluttered. Her voice came out like wind through dry grass. "Please." The children. He looked at them. They were both breathing, but barely. Their skin was pale, lips bluish. Samir's heart twisted in his chest. He pulled off his cloak and wrapped it around the three of them. Then he poured a few drops of water from his flask onto the woman's lips. She swallowed weakly, then gasped, as if the water had shocked her back to life. "Easy," he said. "You're safe now." But she was not safe. Not yet. The night was cold, and her pulse was faint. He lifted her carefully and placed her on his horse, securing the babies against her with the cloak. He led the horse through the dark for hours, until at last he reached his camp, a lonely tent pitched between two low dunes. Inside, he lit a small fire and laid the woman down on his blanket. He warmed some water and cleaned the sand from her face. The babies cried faintly, searching for milk that her body could no longer give. Samir found a goat-skin bag of milk in his provisions, meant for himself, and fed them drop by drop with a piece of cloth. They were so small, so fragile, but they drank greedily. When dawn came, Layla opened her eyes again. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then she saw the man sitting beside her, tending the fire, his face lined with exhaustion and dust. He looked up and smiled gently. "You're awake," he said. "You and your little ones gave me quite a scare." She tried to sit up but groaned from the pain. "Who are you?" "Samir," he said simply. "A traveler. Found you in the dunes." "Why?" she whispered. He looked puzzled. "Why what? Why did you help me?" He shrugged. "Because you were alive. That's reason enough." Tears welled in her eyes. She hadn't known kindness in so long that it felt like pain. "I thought we were going to die." "Not today," he said. For the next few days, Samir nursed them all. He gave her water in small sips, made soup from dried beans and dates, and watched the babies while she slept. He didn't ask questions, and she didn't offer answers. But slowly, she began to tell him bits of her story, how her husband had cast her out, how the people had called her cursed. Samir listened silently, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, he said quietly, "People will believe any cruelty if it saves them from fear." Layla looked at the twins, sleeping side by side. "Their names are Tariq and Zayn," she said. "It means morning star and grace." He smiled. "Good names. Strong names." Days turned into weeks. The desert began to soften with the promise of spring. Layla's strength returned little by little. She would sit outside the tent with the babies in her lap, watching the horizon. Samir taught her how to find water by reading the color of the sand, how to tell direction by the stars. Sometimes he would hum old songs as he worked on repairing his saddle or cooking supper. One night, as the fire crackled and the children slept, Layla spoke. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has. I can never repay you." "You already have," he said. She frowned. "How?" "You reminded me what it means to save something worth saving." She didn't understand then, but later she would learn that Samir had once had a wife and daughter who died in a sandstorm years ago. He had buried them himself and sworn never to love again. Seeing Layla and her children had reopened a wound, but also lit a small flame he thought had long gone out. When the twins were a month old, Layla decided she couldn't hide forever. "I have to go back," she told him one morning. "I have to show them that my sons live." Samir stared at her for a long time. "They won't welcome you," he said. "I know. But I can't let them grow up believing they were born of shame." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll take you." They packed what little they had and set out at dawn. The journey was long, and the wind was fierce that day, but Samir never complained. When they reached the outskirts of the village, Layla's heart pounded in her chest. She saw the same huts, the same cracked well, the same men who had turned their backs on her. When the villagers saw her coming with the twins, they gasped. Some made the sign against evil, others murmured in disbelief. Her husband stepped forward, his face pale as chalk. "You're supposed to be dead," he said. Layla's voice was steady. "You tried to make it so. But the desert gave me back my life." She held up the twins. "These are your sons." The man looked at the babies, then at her. "They are not mine," he spat. "They are demons." Before he could step closer, Samir moved between them. "Careful with your words," he said quietly. "A man who abandons his wife to die has already spoken enough evil for one lifetime." The villagers murmured. Layla's husband glared at Samir. "Who are you to speak here?" "A man who found what you threw away," Samir said. The air grew thick with tension. Then, from the crowd, the old midwife stepped forward. Her eyes were wet with tears. "I saw them born," she said. "They are human, pure and strong. It was I who delivered them while you all turned your backs. The curse is not on the mother, it is on those who cast her out." The people fell silent. Some lowered their heads in shame. Layla's husband looked around, but no one met his eyes. He turned and fled into his hut. Layla stood there trembling. She had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was here, she felt only emptiness. The village elders came forward and offered her food, shelter, apologies. But she shook her head. No, she said. My sons will not grow up here. She turned to Samir. If you'll still have us, we'll travel with you. He looked at her, at the two babies in her arms, and smiled faintly. There's room for all of you. And so they left the village behind. For years, they wandered together from oasis to oasis, selling goods, trading stories, raising the boys. Tariq grew quick and daring, Zayn thoughtful and kind. They called Samir uncle, though in time, they began to call him father. Layla and Samir's bond deepened quietly, built not from romance but from shared survival, from nights spent watching stars and days spent fighting sandstorms. One evening, when the twins were 10, they camped near the edge of a canyon where a river shimmered like molten glass. Layla sat watching the sunset, her hair streaked with silver now. Samir sat beside her, sharpening a knife. You ever think about the past? She asked. Sometimes, he said. But the desert teaches you to walk forward. Look back too long, and you lose the path. She smiled faintly. Still, I wonder what would have become of me if you hadn't come that night. He looked at her, his eyes soft. I think you would have found a way. You're stronger than the desert. She reached out and took his hand. For a long time, neither spoke. The twins laughed somewhere in the distance, chasing each other through the sand. The sound carried through the dusk like music. Years passed. The twins grew into men, brave and loyal. Tariq became a desert scout, guiding caravans safely across the dunes. Zayn became a healer, learning herbs and water lore from travelers they met. Layla and Samir grew old watching them, proud and grateful. When Samir's final day came, he asked to be buried where he had first found Layla, in the heart of the dunes, under a sky full of stars. Layla held his hand until his last breath, whispering the same words he had spoken to her long ago, "You're safe now." After he was gone, she sat beside his grave as the wind swept over the sand. The twins stood behind her, silent. She looked up at the sky and said softly, "The desert took almost everything from me once. But it gave me everything back." And when the night came, the wind sang through the dunes, carrying her words far beyond the horizon, where mercy and survival, love and loss, all became one endless story written in sand and starlight.